On today's episode of the show, CJ May makes his commitment to Louisville on Saturday. We'll explain why this is not only critical for the Louisville football program on the field, but also in the recruiting department. All that and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Louisville.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what's going on, everyone? Happy Sunday. Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. And as always, I want to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast, free and available on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. CJ May finally made his commitment. The Cardinals were the choice. We'll discuss why this commitment was critical, not only for the program on the field, but also in the recruiting department moving forward. We'll explain, or we'll answer whether or not the Cardinals are a top contender for Mikel Brown Jr. A national recruiting analyst believes that to be the case. And then to conclude the show, we will dive into a weekly mailbag segment. We start out in the football recruiting aspect of things, where Louisville finally got the good news that they were hoping for. A couple weeks ago, four-star edge rusher, top 150 prospect CJ May announced that he would be making his decision public on July 13th. I mentioned over the past couple weeks, not only myself, but multiple people out there believed that the Cardinals were in the driver's seat of this recruitment, and Louisville ended up being the choice, thankfully, for the hometown Cardinals. Now, May's commitment is critical for the program on the field, but also in the recruiting side of things. What can we expect from him early on in his Louisville career? We'll answer that here in just a moment. But no doubt, it seems like at the moment, May is going to be the crown jewel of the 2025 high school recruiting class for your Louisville Cardinals. He is the highest ranked commit in the class. He was arguably the top target on the board. Louisville had been recruiting him for basically an entire year. Last August, he mentioned that the Cardinals were one of the top schools on his list. Now, that was before he committed to Notre Dame shortly after that. Well, he opened his recruitment up just a couple months after that. Some believe it was because Notre Dame has that sort of unspoken rule that you commit here, you don't take visits anywhere else, sort of like Clemson. But regardless of why he decommitted, he opened up his recruitment, and Louisville got involved very, very quickly. That's assuming that they were never not involved. But Louisville seemed to be right there up close. They got multiple visits in the span of a couple months, and he committed to the program on July 13th. Like I said, crown jewel in this class. There's a very good chance that he could end up as the top-rated pledge in the Flyville 25 class. He's ranked as the 146th best player in the country, according to 24/7 Sports, 17th best edge rusher, 12th best prospect in the state of Alabama, plays for Highland Home High School. This past season, he had 54 tackles for loss, 54 tackles, 10 tackles for loss. That would be video game numbers, like Heisman caliber numbers, but 54 tackles, 10 for a loss, 7.5 sacks, 1 interception that was a pick six, 2 forced fumbles, and 2 fumble recoveries. Played on the offensive side, had 2 catches for 66 yards and a touchdown. The 6'4" edge rusher weighs 225 pounds. And like I mentioned, Louisville has been recruiting him for quite some time. What can we expect from him right away? Well, I think that we have to, like every high school prospect, understand that it is going to take some time for players to develop. Every once in a while, you get a freshman or a couple of freshmen that are able to arrive on the scene and be immediate impact players. Now, do I think that CJ May can play an impact early on? I do, but what does that look like? Well, for me, I think that he best serves a role as the pass rushing outside linebacker, the Leo, as it is coined in this 4-2-5 base defensive package. I think that early on he's going to be a pass rush specialist. The potential is there, but it's about showing the consistency for him. He's got the tools to succeed, but ultimately I think that with more collegiate instruction, more time in the weight room, although he plays with a good amount of strength, he's got solid bend and twitch, he plays fluid, but it's a matter of being consistent, putting yourself in situations where you can make plays early on and sealing the edge consistently. Is he able to do that right away? I think that he needs to improve as a run defender, especially at the next level. But right away, it would not surprise me with as many guys as Louisville could be losing at the end of the 2024 campaign that he could jump into the equation, jump into the room, and be able to at least be able to be a pass rush specialist in the 2 deep. I thought it was interesting that he made a comment in his commitment, basically press conference, that he's going to be graduating early. So one could believe that he could be an early enrollee, which would be great for Louisville because you would then not have to, contend with other players, especially even after he signs his national letter of intent, because it seems like you are recruiting your roster all the time. Louisville chose the Cardinals over teams like the Syracuse Orange, the Auburn Tigers, the Washington Huskies. It seemed like this was a battle between Louisville and Syracuse. Now, one thing that I want to do is give a shout out to Locked On Syracuse host Jackson Holzer. He did a great job of discussing this recruitment. And I will say for future reference, if Louisville is ever involved in a recruiting battle, football or basketball, with Syracuse, definitely tune into that show because he delivers great insight. He discusses how realistic of a chance Syracuse has in that respective recruitment, how much they're prioritizing a certain prospect, etc. So if Louisville's ever involved with Syracuse in a battle, definitely be sure to make your way over to Locked On Syracuse because he will definitely have broken that down. So shout out to Jackson. He was great in covering this recruitment leading up to yesterday. But Louisville was able to get the victory in the recruitment. Now they will have to make sure that he stays committed. At this point, it seems like Auburn is still not going to prioritize him. I know that they are, I believe, about to get a big-time potential 5-star level commitment. But things do change like the wind in recruiting, so it is pretty pivotal that Louisville continues to recruit him at a high level. I'm not worried about Louisville, showing him that he's a priority. It seems like they've done so over the past year, and they're going to continue to do so. I mean, after all, he is likely going to be their crown jewel in the recruiting class. So I believe that the upside is there. I think that he could be a guy that could end up being a starter as a sophomore if things go well for him. I do think next season, ultimately, pass rush specialist is the likely role that he will slide into as he continues to add more strength, improve his technique, refine that technique and footwork, and get to a point where he's able to defend the run well too. So, but not only is this critical on the field, but the recruiting department as well. And arguably that's as important as it is on the field. Like I mentioned, you are replacing a handful of guys that you brought in via the transfer portal this season. And I think that at that Leo spot, you lost Tyler Barron. You're not really sure what the status for Mason Riger is moving forward. And then your grad transfers that you brought in, there is a very real chance that in the 2025 campaign, that spot is going to be wide open. So getting CJ May's commitment to pair alongside Tyrone Burris makes for a great 1-2 punch in this class. But Louisville fans, let's call it how it is. They've been looking for that significant commitment in the high school class. Now, I mean, granted, yes, what Jeff Brohm and company have done in the portal, it's incredible. They've been one of the top transfer portal winners the past 2 offseason cycles, and that's fantastic. But high school recruiting has taken a hit because of that, obviously because the NIL resources are being allocated to the portal and not so much the high school class. They're taking more swings on diamond in the rough type hopefuls and, banking on some of those guys to pan out and develop. But I think that getting a commitment from a guy like CJ May helps to sort of squash some of the rising vocal concerns about the high school recruiting. And Louisville's lost a couple of battles recently. Chastain Brown, some other players. I think I forget Carl Jenkins Jr. That's his name. Both ended up going to Central Florida, or Chastain Brown's apparently about to go to Central Florida, one of the two. But Louisville's lost some recruiting battles that they needed to win. And you're looking for a couple of possible elite level players, high 4-star level guys in this class. So you're sort of taking care of the perception aspect of this with this commitment. And I think that, top players want to play with other top players, and getting a guy ranked inside of the top 150 showing, hey, look, it's cool to still play for Louisville. I think that that's key. This recruitment and this commitment is significant for the program moving forward on the field, but also in the recruiting department for the Flywheel 25 class and moving forward. So I'm interested to see what his ranking does moving forward. Right now, he's ranked inside the top 150 according to 24/7 Sports. On the composite side of things, he's ranked as 306. So other recruiting services have him a little lower, but he's still a 4-star level guy. I ultimately think he's going to remain a top 300 guy in the composite. So it's going to come down to whether or not he has a good senior season, and I hope that that is the case for the Alabama native. But huge recruiting news for the football side of things. We're going to transition over to the basketball side, where Louisville has been offering multiple 5-star caliber players. They've gotten some visits announced. Well, the Cardinals were coined as a top contender for a 5-star prospect in the 2025 class. We'll identify who that is, whether or not that is the case, and more coming up after we tell you about our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered with over 122 million parts. For your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part's guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Cardinal fans, once again, if you're having to turn down the volume with all the shouting, you need to make the switch to Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. Thanks again for tuning in to this Sunday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Once again, appreciate everyone for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast, free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. Transitioning over into the basketball recruiting side of things, where national recruiting analyst for 24/7 Sports, Travis Branham, listed Louisville as a top contender for 5-star top 10 prospect Mikel Brown Jr. He said earlier this week, Louisville was in a group with Alabama and Kentucky that, and I quote in an article from Cardinal Authority, the Louisville 24/7 Sports site, says, as of today, sounds to be Alabama, Kentucky, and Louisville, talking about the top contenders for Mikel Brown Jr. Mikel Brown Jr., originally from Orlando, made his way up to Atlanta to play in Overtime Elite. The 6'3" point guard is ranked as the 8th best prospect in the class, according to 24/7 Sports. Second best point guard, second best prospect in the state of Georgia. Played for Cold Hearts at Overtime Elite this year. 13.4 points per game, 5.4 assists, 2.1 rebounds per contest. He was even better in the playoffs. I know some people have some reservations about this Overtime Elite League. They have some reservations about who he's playing with on the AAU circuit, but the fact that Louisville is listed in the group with the top contenders, I think that that's key. Now, he has visited Central Florida. Being from Orlando, he's visited Ole Miss. He's visited Alabama, so on and so forth. I mean, he's got about every offer that you could think of. But Alabama and Kentucky are no slouches on the recruiting trail, obviously. I mean, Kentucky is going to be tough to go up against for any player. Alabama, obviously, as well. But I think that one thing helps Louisville. Put it this way. There's some questions as to how much this will help Louisville, but it won't hurt them. Mikel Brown Jr. plays for Team Loaded on the AAU circuit, and thankfully that is not in the Nike EYBL league. It is Adidas 3SSB circuit, which helps out a ton, or at the very least it doesn't hurt, because AAU ties, Nike ties. I know NIL has a lot of the stronghold on recruiting now, but make no mistake about it, shoe money still does exist. These ties do exist with recruiting allegiances with Nike, the brand, but having him on the AAU level, I think that definitely helps for an Adidas school. Now, is that going to be the deciding factor? I do not believe so, but it does not hurt. Louisville was in attendance this weekend down in South Carolina to watch him play both or all three of Pat Kelsey, Thomas Carr, and Brian Kleiman. He had over 20 points in both of his games. Look, I think that ultimately he's one of the best players in the country. He helped the USA team to the 2024 FIBA U18 AmeriCup gold medal. Started all 6 games, averaged over 10 points, averaged, I think, like 3 rebounds and a team high 5.2 assists. There really isn't one aspect of the offensive side where his game is lacking. He is electric with the ball in his hands, great at facilitating, fantastic vision, fantastic feel for the half court. Does a good job of going north-south, changing direction, changing speeds, doesn't really get slowed up or sped down with the ball in his hands, and he's a 3-level scorer. So one thing to understand is that this is going to be a tall task, as will any recruitment that is factoring in an elite level. But in an article by Jody Demling, again with the Cardinal Authority site, Louisville's 24/7 Sports site, he got a couple of great quotes that I want to share. From Mikel Brown. He says, "I'll get some visits scheduled after the AAU season, and when asked if Louisville could get a visit, oh, for sure," is what Brown said. Brown said that he was excited to see what Pat Kelsey and the staff could do. He said he knew the program had been down for a couple of years, but expected big things. He says they're going to be really good, and it's Louisville. Of course, they had guys like speaking about Donovan Mitchell, and people like Russ Smith and Jordan Nwora. It's a basketball city, and Coach Kelsey and his staff will do a great job. He goes on to say that coaching staff is great people. They text me all the time and stay consistent with it, just how I would fit into the system that Coach Kelsey is coaching and how he plays his point guards. I watched him at College of Charleston, and they were the best mid-major last year. So there was a couple other quotes, but I won't go too far into that. Be sure to check out Jody's article if you need to get a little bit more clarification. But I mean, I think that this stage is set up. If Louisville wants to get a commitment from one of the elite prospects in the class, I feel like this is one of their best chances to do so, because he's not on the Nike EYBL circuit. It seems like the relationship is being built there with the staff. It seems like Thomas Carr is his main point of contact. But I'm not really worried about the overtime elite league either. The Thompson twins, Amin and Asar, have been electric in the NBA. Rob Dillingham was great at Kentucky. Elite level talent, I think, can succeed at overtime elite and still be great at the collegiate level or even, the NBA level as well. So the main thing now is going to be to see if Louisville can get that visit scheduled. That's the first thing. You have to get, involved in this recruitment. If Travis Branham, who is really well plugged into high school recruiting, I think that you can take what he's saying for face value. Now, being one of the top contenders and being, the ultimate choice, it's not the same. But to be in that list right now with the offers that he has, I think that it's extremely key. So, yes, Louisville is a top contender. But what does that mean for Louisville moving forward? Now, you have to get the visit, and you have to continue to impress him, get him on campus for a couple of games this upcoming year. And like is going to help with multiple other recruits, win on the court. That's the main thing. So we'll keep our ear to the ground with this recruitment, but it is great that Louisville is listed as a top contender for Mikel Brown Jr., a top 10 player in the class. Before we wrap up today's show, I do want to dive into the weekly mailbag, a couple of great questions that we will answer coming up after the break. Thanks for tuning in to the Sunday edition of the show and for making Locked On Louisville your first listen. For your second listen, if you want to get to know a little bit more about an ACC opponent that Louisville doesn't play this year in football, but they will play in basketball. They are going up against them in multiple recruiting battles. Head over to Locked On Syracuse. Jackson Holzer does a great job of, yes, being a Syracuse fan, but covering things in an unbiased way that won't, push you away from listening to what he has to say. I find his breakdowns to be very insightful, and I think that you will too. So be sure to make Locked On Syracuse your second listen of the day. But on the final segment, we're going to dive into this weekly mailbag, a couple of great questions that I want to get answered both on the football and basketball side of things. We're going to start out on the football, where Louisville, their top rankings on College Football 25 have dropped, and Quincy Riley is the top-rated guy at 92, Ashton Gelati at 90. Do you believe that that was the right way or the right decision for the committee to go with? Here's the thing. Both Jacob Lane and I both said that Gelati and Riley were going to be number 1 and number 2 in that order. It was flip-flopped. Riley was number 1. Gelati was number 2. I don't dislike that. I think that Gelati was a little bit underrated, if you will. I think that he's higher than a 90. I would probably have put both at 92 if that's the case, but it is what it is. I'm not really truly worried about it. I think that both are going to be fun to play with on the field. And I don't know if you all saw the graphics that were kind of circulating social media. They did a great job of getting Cardinal Stadium on there. And I'm just so ready to play this game later this week. So moving on to the actual football side of things, but appreciate that question though. On the actual football side of things, on the offensive side, I know that you're going through the previews. Who's the one player that you feel like is being slept on the most, that isn't getting the hype that they should, and they're going to have a solid season and turn some heads? That's a really, really good question. It made me think for like 10 minutes because I'm like, oh, I could see this guy doing that. Or no, I could see that guy having, an impact on this too. Oh, what about that guy? You could pick a player at every position to fit that, but the whole offensive side of the ball, and I can only pick one guy that's going to have, like the largest, oh, damn, look at me type thing. It's tough. Man. And I went kind of back and forth with this. I went with guys like Jaleel Skinner at the tight end spot. I went with Jimmy Callaway at wide receiver, and I went with Kewan Brown at running back. For me, I think that you could go a couple different directions, but I ultimately went with Jaleel Skinner. And I think it's mainly because I think Kewan Brown's being discussed. Like, Kewan Brown's being talked about as that change of pace, third-string running back that's going to get some carries. Jimmy Callaway and Jaleel Skinner just are not really being talked about. The tight end spot in general is not really being talked about a lot, but wide receiver, you got Colin Lacey and Ja'Cory Brooks, and then you talk about Chris Bell. I think Jimmy Callaway is going to play a role, but I think that Jaleel Skinner is really talented, and I think a change of scenery could really do him well in this offense where Louisville's going to throw the ball. I think that they're going to utilize his speed and athleticism to their advantage. And Jaleel Skinner is going to be making some big-time plays. Brohm really likes to utilize the tight end spot in his offenses. And I think the Skinner is just really not being talked about. If you're talking about tight end, you're just probably discussing Mark Redmond, and for good reason. But Skinner is going to get some meaningful snaps for this team. Last football question that we will answer. What is the ultimate trip-up game on the schedule this season? Man, this is pretty interesting. Again, couple different questions that you could, or a couple different answers that you could go with, and I don't think ultimately would end up being wrong. But I will tell you one that is really getting overlooked. That's the Georgia Tech game. It's the third game of the season. It's right after a bye game. Georgia Tech's going to be better than people think. They gave Louisville a run for their money last season. They beat North Carolina. They were, I would say, respectable against Georgia. Even though Georgia won the game, they were respectable against Kirby Smart's team. I think that Georgia Tech game is the one that people are really, really overlooking here. So I'm going to go with that one. Rick Pitino is going to be making some NIL donations to Kentucky. How do you feel about the way that he is sort of treating things with Louisville at the current moment? Well, it's no secret that you can tell that the relationship isn't great there. Like, he loves his former players at Louisville. And I don't mind him supporting his guys at Kentucky. I think him donating to Kentucky football NIL is kind of like one of those, damn, it's like that type moments. Like, it doesn't feel good. And I'm not going to sit here and like try to justify not being upset about it, because you can sit there and you're like, damn, that's messed up. But it is what it is. You have to understand that Pitino probably still looks at Louisville and is like, we're not going to reconcile things until you do right by Tom Jurich and recognize him for what he did. And, regardless of your feelings about what all went down with the Katina Powell stuff, the Brian Bowen situation, I think ultimately Louisville is going to make their peace with Rick Pitino and Tom Jurich both. But until that happens, I just don't think that Pitino's going to do Louisville any solids. And it sucks, but it's the reality of things. But donating to Kentucky NIL is like, okay, all right, appreciate it. But I really don't have anything other to say than literally I responded. I was like, oh, damn. That's how it was. Last question of the mailbag, directed over to the basketball recruiting side of things. How important is it for the Cardinals to get an elite prospect committed in this class? I mean, it's not required, but it would do wonders for this program. It's exceptionally important, but it's not like the end-all be-all, because the transfer portal makes it to where you can get ready, available players and ready to contribute guys. But getting let's say like an elite level prospect, let's say like a top 30 guy, say you get another Kanai Ruths in this class. Yeah, that would be huge for the program on the court, because you get an elite level player that you can, attempt to develop. But off the court, it's a perception game and saying, oh, look, Louisville is getting these 5-star level players. They're legit. I think that it helps build up the national image of Louisville. Again, it helps rebuild that perception, but it also shows recruits, hey, look, elite level guys, it's cool to come here as well. So I do think that it is exceptionally important, but I don't think it's required at this point, because high school recruiting, you can afford to take more developmental pieces because of the way that the transfer portal is, but you still want to go out and get some guys that fit your system. So important, but not required. So that is going to wrap up today's episode of the show. On tomorrow's episode, we will go back to our positional previews the wide receiver spot, discussing why Ja'Cory Brooks and Colin Lacey will be a top 3 wide receiver duo in the ACC, what to expect from guys like Chris Bell, Jimmy Callaway, Antonio Meeks, Jaden Thompson, and more. So be sure to stay tuned to that. Everyone have a great end of the weekend, great start to the week. We'll see you